Welcome to the POOIA lecture series. Initially, I would like to extend my gratitude to our gracious speaker, Mr. Parviz Nezami, the participants present here and present in our lecture sessions, our supporters, and the board of POOIA for having bestowed this responsibility upon me. I would also like to say a few words about POOIA, since many people are still asking me to explain what POOIA stands for and how it is related to Qanun and what its responsibilities are. POOIA stands for Professional Organization of Iranian-Americans in Atlanta. POOIA is a non-religious, non-political, and an independent organization which is a branch of Qanun Farhangi Iranian Atlanta or Persian Cultural Center, established in 2012. It has its own board of directors, different from that of Qanun. The board members are me, Minu Varzagar, and I have the honor to be the president, Dr. Hamid Arabnia, PhD, computer scientist, University of Georgia, Atlanta, professor, Dr. Abdi Modarisi, PhD, former director at the AT&T Labs, computer and electronic scientist. Dr. Shahriar Haidari, PhD in mathematics, assistant to the president of Piedmont University and professor of IT. Dr. Hamid Garmestani, PhD, professor of Georgia Tech, materials science specialist. Mr. Mohsen Mustajabi, mechanical engineer, MS. Dr. Asil, PhD, and a nuclear physicist. Mr. Wahid Samimi, electrical engineer, MS. Ms. Sarnaz Musavi, MA, artist and entrepreneur. And Mr. Nima Azad, engineer, MS, construction manager. POOIA seeks to celebrate the heritage and achievements of all Iranian-American professionals. POOIA works hard to uphold the three pillars of its mission to: 1, provide an opportunity for Iranian-American professionals to network and prosper. 2, help the next generation of Iranian-American professionals to network and prosper. 3, promote a positive image and counter the negative media depiction of Iran and Iranian professionals. Before I introduce our remarkable and honorable speaker, I would like to announce the 2 future programs of Qanun. But before I do that, I asked Dr. Garmestani to announce the Sunday program. Dr. Garmestani. Now I will briefly introduce our honorable speaker today. And Mr. Parviz Nezami graduated from the University of Manchester in civil engineering in 1966. He was a professor at the National University in Tehran, Iran, 1975 to 1979. He worked as a project manager in charge of the construction of a number of civil engineering projects in Iran, Canada, and the United States. He retired in 1995 to devote his life to the study and research of Persian history and literature. He established Nezami Literary Society in Long Island, New York in 2000 to promote the beautiful and one-of-a-kind literary creations by the great masters of Persian poetry. To accomplish this task, he organized monthly public nights of poetry nationwide, gives public lectures, wrote and published 11 books on the subject, and founded Persian Cultural Television Iran, broadcasting for the benefit of Persian-speaking communities worldwide. Dr. Garmestani, can you show a few books that he has written, Mr. Nezami has written? These are all the books that Mr. Nezami has written. 11 volumes. We just have a few of them to show the cover. And this is his last book. This is the book. And he's going to actually talk about this book. And he's going to talk about a glance at the Persian poetry of Iran. Okay, Mr. Nezami, we are honored to have you tonight. It is an absolute pleasure to have you as a speaker. On behalf of POOIA and کانون فرهنگی ایرانیان Atlanta and the Cultural Committee, I want to thank you profusely and also, congratulate you on your last book. Thank you so much, Mr. Nezami. We are all ears. And unmute yourself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. With many thanks to Atlanta Persian Cultural Center, POOIA, and Dr. Varzegar, Kanun's Cultural Program Director, and Dr. Garmestani, who is helping broadcasting this program, for having me given the opportunity to present at this gathering a brief talk on a glance at the history of Persian poetry, as well as an introduction of my 11 books written and published in English for the benefit of our second and third Iranian generations who, due to the immigration of their parents to foreign lands after the 1979 revolution in Iran, never had the opportunity to learn to read and write Farsi, as well as for the benefit of English-speaking people throughout the world who might be interested to learn about the history and the exquisite, one-of-a-kind treasures of Persian poetry created by none other than our great scholars, poets, and literary writers through the past 1,200 years. To begin with, allow me to present to you a short history of our homeland, the formation of the Persian Empire, which started with the immigration of Aryan tribes to what is called the Iranian Plateau around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. At the end of the second millennium, the Iranian tribes emerged in the regions of northwest Iran in what later became the territory of the Median Kingdom, with a population of Iranian-speaking people in the majority. The Medes were later able to establish their kingdom with Ekbatana, which is Hamadan today, as their capital between 616 and 609 BC, after the fall of the Assyrian Empire. Thus, a unified Median state was formed, which together with Babylonia, Lydia, and Egypt became one of the four major powers of the ancient Near East. About 150 years later, this empire was conquered by Cyrus the Great, who established the Achaemenid Empire. Cambyses, Cyrus's son, conquered the last major power of the region, the ancient Egypt, causing the collapse of the 26th dynasty of Egypt. Since he became ill and died before or while leaving Egypt, stories developed as related by Herodotus, the Greek historian, that he was struck down for impiety against the ancient Egyptian deities. He was followed finally by Darius the Great in 522 BC. Darius based his claim on membership in a collateral line of the Achaemenid Empire. Darius's first capital was at Susa, and he started the building program of Persepolis later on. He built a canal between the Nile and the Red Sea, the forerunner of the modern Suez Canal. He improved the extensive road system, and it was during his reign that mention is first made of the Royal Road, a great highway stretching all the way from Susa to Sardis, with posting stations at regular intervals. Major reforms took place under Darius. Coinage in the form that was invented over a century before in Lydia in 660 BC was standardized, and its administrative efficiency increased. Darik, which was a gold coin, and the shekel silver coin were standardized. Coinage had already been in use more or less throughout the empire. Darius was succeeded by his son Xerxes in 499 BC. The Achaemenid Empire was attacked from the west by Alexander the Macedonian in 330 BC, who conquered Persia and burned down its magnificent capital city, the Persepolis. Upon his death, the Seleucids ruled Persia for about 120 years. Before they were defeated by the Iranian elites of the Central Plateau and reclaimed power by the 2nd century BC under the Parthian Empire. The Parthian Empire subsisted for about 5 centuries, during which time Roman-Persian wars broke out and continued almost incessantly up and into the next coming empire, the Sasanian dynasty. The first Shah of the Sasanian Empire, Ardashir, the first, started reforming the country economically and militarily. For a period of more than 400 years, Iran was once again one of the leading powers in the world, alongside its neighboring rivals, the Roman and the Byzantine empires. The entire territory at its height encompassed all of today's Iran, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Abkhazia, Dagestan, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, parts of Pakistan, Central Asia, Eastern Arabia, and parts of Egypt. Although Persians adopted the religion of their conquerors, over the centuries, they worked to protect and revive their distinctive language and culture, a process known as Persianization. Arabs and Turks participated in this attempt. In the 9th and 10th centuries, non-Arab subjects of the empire created a movement called Shu'ubiyeh in response to the privileged status of Arabs. Most of those behind the movement were Persians, but references to Egyptians, Berbers, and Arameans are attested to. citing as its basis Islamic notions of equality of races and nations. The movement was primarily concerned with preserving Persian culture and protecting Persian identity, though within a Muslim context. During the Umayyad Caliphate, the Arab conquerors imposed Arabic as the primary language of the subject peoples throughout their empire. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, who was not happy with the prevalence of the Persian language in the administration, ordered the official language of the conquered land be replaced by Arabic, sometimes by force. Non-Arabs were forced to even speak Arabic inside their homes, and those violating the order would be prosecuted and punished. When Qutayba bin Muslim, under the command of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, was sent to Khwarezm with a military expedition and conquered it for the second time, he swiftly killed whoever wrote Khwarezmian native language, whoever knew of the Khwarezmian heritage, history, and culture. He then killed all the Zoroastrian priests and burned and wasted their books until gradually the illiterate only remained, who knew nothing of writing, and hence their history was mostly forgotten. A real tragedy. The Samanid dynasty led the revival of Persian culture, an event that we could truly call the Persian Renaissance. This was, in many ways, similar to the Renaissance in Europe that commenced almost 700 years later in the 15th century. As I mentioned, the Arabs had forbidden the use of Persian languages like Pahlavi, Dari, and other Persian dialects, and had forced Iranians all over the empire to exclusively learn and use Arabic. Yaqub Lays Safar, the founder of Safari dynasty, revolted against the caliphate in Baghdad, although he had previously received the charter of the governorship of a number of Eastern Persian territories from the caliph. Yaqub Lays Safar encouraged poets and writers to resume the use of the Persian language for the first time after 200 years of the brutal rule of the Arabs. Muhammad Wasif Sistani was therefore the first Persian poet commissioned to write his poems in Persian. Other poets, and in particular Rudaki, followed suit, and Persian became once again the foremost language alongside Arabic for writing and speaking throughout the Iranian territories. This was the start of the Persian Renaissance movement in the 9 centuries. The Samanids later on revived many ancient Persian festivals and strongly supported and encouraged the development of newly resurrected Persian writings and traditions. Their successors, the Ghaznavis, who were non-Iranian Turkic origin, also were instrumental in the reviving of Persian culture. The Ghaznavis actually facilitated and encouraged the gatherings of a large number of Persian poets and writers, led by the famous Persian poet Unsuri, who was serving as the poet laureate to the court of Sultan Mahmud. The Ghaznavid dynasty was Persianate Muslim dynasty of Turkic origin, ruling over large parts of Iran, Afghanistan, much of the Transoxiana, and the northwest northwest Indian subcontinent from 977 to 1186. After helping to overthrow the Samanids at the instigation of the Caliph of Baghdad, the dynasty was founded by a Turkic Mamluk named Sabuktikin. The culmination of the Persian civilization move next was the culmination of the Persian civilization movement was the Shahnameh, the national epic of Iran by Ferdowsi, written directly in Persian. This magnificent work reflects Iran's ancient history, mythology, unique cultural values, its pre-Islamic Zoroastrian religion, and its sense of nationhood. The Islamization of Iran was to yield deep changes within the cultural, scientific, and political structure of Iranian society. The blossoming of the Persian literature, philosophy, science, medicine, and art became major elements of the newly formed Muslim civilization, inheriting a heritage of a few thousand years of civilization created by Iranians, and being at the crossroads of the many cultural highways that contributed to Persia emerging as what culminated into the so-called Islamic Golden Age, and thanks to the ingenuity, creativity, and exceptional talent and work of Persians. During this period, hundreds of Persian scholars and scientists, whom Europeans mistakenly labeled Arab, became, because their books and manuscripts were written in Arabic, vastly contributed to science and medicine that later influenced the rise of European science during the Renaissance. The Persian language is predominantly spoken and used officially within Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. Three mutually intelligible standard varieties, namely Iranian Persian, Dari Persian, which is officially named Dari since 1958, and Tajiki Persian, which officially named Tajiki since the Soviet era. It is also spoken natively in the Tajik variety by a significant population within Uzbekistan, as well as within other regions with a Persian history in the cultural sphere of Greater Iran. It is written officially within Iran and Afghanistan in the Persian alphabet, a derivation of the Arabic script, and within Tajikistan in the Tajik alphabet, a derivation of Cyrillic. Cyrillic script is a writing system used for various languages across Eurasia, and is a national script in various Slavic, Turkic, Mongolic, and Iranian-speaking countries in Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia, and Northern Asia. The Persian language is a continuation of Middle Persian, the official religion and literary language of the Sasanian Empire, itself a continuation of Old Persian, which was used in the Achaemenid Empire. It originated in the region of Fars, Persia, in southwestern Iran. Its grammar is similar to many European languages. Now, to continue with the discussion on Persian literature, and in particular Persian poetry, it is important to note that Persian classical literature, both poetry or prose, is fundamentally built by its writers and authors upon moral and spiritual foundations to promote spiritual, ethical, and humanistic principles based on individual integrity, loyalty, social justice, morality, truth and fairness, family honor, personal responsibility, good manners and character, humanity, love, and mutual respect, to preserve the health and welfare of individuals, and above all, education and proper upbringing of children to maintain order and discipline in society. The ancient Iranian religion introduced by Zoroaster about 1000 years BC was based upon these three principles: good thought, good act, and good talk. It promoted honesty and truth. It condemned lying to one another and declared it to be a satanic act. Khorasani style of Persian poetry, whose followers were mostly associated with the greater Khorasan, is characterized by its supercilious diction, dignified tone, and relatively literate language. The chief representatives of this lyricism are poets like Asjadi, Farrukhi Sistani, Unsuri, and Manuchehri. Panegyric masters such as Rudeki were known for their love of nature, their verses abounding with evocative descriptions. Through these courts and systems of patronage emerged the epic style of poetry, with Ferdowsi's Shahnameh standing at the apex. By glorifying the Iranian historical past in heroic and elevated verses, Ferdowsi and other notables such as Daqiqi and Asadi Tusi presented the Ajam, non-Arab Iranians, the title that Arabs have given to the Iranians as Ajam, which means ignorant, powerless to speak, with a source of pride and inspiration that has helped to preserve a sense of identity for the Iranian people over the ages. Ferdowsi set a model to be followed by a host of other poets later on. In the didactic genre, one can mention Sana'i. Sana'i's masterpiece, Hadiqat al-Haqiqeh, which means Garden of Truth, as well as Nezami's Mahsan al-Asrar, means Treasury of Secrets. Some of Attar's works also belong to this genre, as do the major works of Rumi, although some tend to classify these in the lyrical type due to their mystical and emotional quality. In addition, some tend to group Nasir Khosrow's works in this style as well. However, true gems of this genre are two books by Sa'di, a heavyweight of Persian literature, the Bustan and the Golistan. Mystical and Sufi poetry, the style that often is called Iraqi, is known by its emotional lyric qualities, rich meters, and the relative simplicity of its language. Emotional romantic poetry was not something new, however, as works such as Visuramin by As'ad Gurgani and Yusuf Zulekha by Am'aq Bukharai exemplify poets such as Sana'i and Attar, who ostensibly inspired Rumi. Khaqani, Sherwani, Anvari, and Nezami were highly respected ghazal writers. However, the elite of this school are Rumi, Sa'di, and Hafiz Shirazi. After the 15th century, the Indian style of Persian poetry, sometimes also called Isfahani or Safavid style, took over. This style had its roots in the Timurid era and produced the likes of Amir Khosrow Dehlavi and Lal Goya. In the 19th century, Persian literature experienced dramatic changes and entered a new era. The beginning of this change was exemplified by an incident at the court of Nasiruddin Shah of the Qajar dynasty, when the reform-minded Prime Minister Amir Kabir chastised the poet laureate Habibullah Qa'ani for lying in a panegyric qasida written in the Prime Minister's honor. Amir Kabir saw poetry in general and the type of poetry that had developed during the Qajar period as detrimental to progress and modernization in Iranian society, which he believed was in dire need of change. Such concerns were also expressed by others such as Ali Akhundzadeh, Mirza Agha Khan Kermani, and Mirza Malcolm Khan. Malcolm Khan also addressed a need for a change in Persian poetry, in literary terms as well, always linking it to social concerns. Eventually, it was not before long that these concerns culminated in the form of certain intellectual movement in Iran that involved the Iranian experience of modernity and its associated science, literature, poetry, and political structures that have been changing since the late 19th and 20th century, leading to the Persian constitutional revolution of 1906 to 1911. The idea that change in poetry was necessary became widespread. Many agreed that Persian poetry should reflect the realities of a country in transition. This idea was proposed by notable figures such as Ali Akbar Dehkhoda and Abul Qasim Arif, who challenged the traditional system of Persian poetry in terms of introducing new content and experimentation with rhetoric, lexicosemantics, and structure. Dehkhoda, for instance, used a lesser-known traditional form, which was called the Musammat, to elegize the execution of a revolutionary journalist during the constitutional revolution. Arif employed the ghazal, which is the most central genre within lyrical tradition, to write his Payam Azadi, message of freedom. Some researchers argue that the notion of socio-political ramifications of aesthetic change led to the idea of poets as social leaders trying the limits and possibilities of social change. An important movement in modern Persian literature centers on the question of modernization and westernization, and whether terms are really synonymous when describing the evolution of Persian society. It can be argued that almost all advocates of modernism in Persian literature, from Akhundzadeh, Kermani, and Malcolm Khan to Dehkhoda, Arif, Bahar, and Taghi Rafat, were inspired by developments and changes that had occurred in the Western, particularly European literature. Such inspirations did not mean blindly copying Western models, but rather adopting aspects of Western literature and changing them to feed changing them to fit the needs of Iranian culture. Following the pioneering works of Ahmad Kasravi, Sadiq Hedayat, Mushfiq Kazemi, and many others, the Iranian wave of comparative literature and literary criticism reached a symbolic crest with the emergence of Abdul Hossein Zarinkoub, Shahrukh Meshkub, Hushang Golshiri, and Ibrahim Golestan. A few notable classical poets have arisen since the 19th century, among whom Muhammad Taqi Bahar and Parvin Nezami have been most celebrated. Muhammad Taqi Bahar had the title of King of Poets given to him by Muzaffaruddin Shah, and a significant role in the emergence and development of Persian literature as a distinct institution in the early parts of the 20th century. The theme of his poems was the social and political situation in Iran. Parvin Nezami may be called the greatest Persian woman, writing in the classical style. One of her remarkable series are called Mast va Hoshyar, which means the sober and the drunk. Now, talking about modern Persian poetry, we get to Nima Yushij, who is considered to be the father of modern Persian poetry, introducing many techniques and forms to differentiate the modern from the old. Nevertheless, the credit for popularizing this new literary form within a country and culture solidly based on 1,000 years of classical poetry goes to his few disciples, such as Ahmad Shamlu, who adopted Nima's methods and tried new techniques of modern poetry. What Nima founded in contemporary poetry, his successor, Ahmad Shamlu, continued. Nima held that the formal technique dominating classical poetry interfered with its vitality, vigor, and progress. Although he accepted some of its aesthetic properties and extended them to his poetry, he never ceased to widen its poetic experience by emphasizing the natural order of this art. General terms were subsumed by the formal limitations imposed on poetic expression. Nima's poetry transgressed these limitations. It relied on the natural function inherent within poetry itself to portray the poet's solidarity with life and the wide world surrounding him or her in a specific and unambiguous details and scenes. Sepid poetry continues the poetic vision as Nima expressed it and avoids the contrived rules imposed on its creation. However, its most distinctive difference from Nima's poetry is to move away from the rhymes it employed. Nima paid attention to an overall harmonious rhyming and created many experimental examples to achieve this end. Ahmad Shamlu discovered the inner characteristics of poetry and its manifestation in the literary creation of classical masters, as well as Nima's experience. He offered an individual approach by distancing himself from the obligations imposed by older poetry and some of the limitations that had entered the Nimai's rules. The poem is written in more natural words and incorporates a prose-like process without losing its poetic distinction. Sepid poetry is a developing branch of Nima's poetry built upon Nima Yushij's innovations. Nima thought any change in the construction and tools of a poet's expression is conditioned on his or her knowledge of the world and a revolutionized outlook. Sepid poetry could not take root outside its teaching and its application. According to Simine Behbahani, Sepid poetry did not receive general acceptance before Bijan Jalali's works. He is considered the founder of Sepid poetry, according to Behbahani. She herself used the Charpare style of Nima and subsequently turned to Ghazal, a free-flowing poetry, a style similar to the Western sonnet. Simin contributed to a historic development in the form of Ghazal, as she added theoretical subjects, daily events, and conversation into her poetry. She has expanded the range of traditional Persian verse forms and produced some of the most significant works of Persian literature in the 20th century. A reluctant follower of Nima Yushij, Mehdi Akhavan Sales has established a bridge between the Khorasani and Nima schools. The critics considered Mehdi Akhavan Sales as one of the best contemporary Persian poets. He's one of the pioneers of free verse, which is new style poetry in Persian literature, particularly of modern style epics. It was his ambition for a long time to introduce a fresh style to Persian poetry. Furugh Farrokhzad is important in the literary history of Iran for three reasons. First, she was among the first generation to embrace the new style of poetry pioneered by Nima Yushij during the late 1920s, which demanded that poets experiment with rhyme, imagery, and the individual voice. Second, she was the first modern Iranian woman to graphically articulate private sexual landscapes from a woman's perspective. Finally, she transcended her own literary role and experimented with acting, painting, and documentary filmmaking. Feridun Moshiri is best known as a conciliator of classical Persian poetry, with the new poetry initiated by Nima Yushij. One of the major contributions of Moshiri's poetry, according to some observers, is the broadening of the social and geographical scope of modern Persian literature. A poet of the last generation, before the Islamic Revolution, worthy of mention is Muhammad Reza Shafi'i Katkani. Though he is from Khorasan and sways between allegiance to Nima and Akhaban Salis, in his poetry he shows the influences of Hafiz and Mawlavi. He uses simple lyrical language and is mostly inspired by the political atmosphere. He's the most successful of those poets who in the past 4 decades have tried hard to find a synthesis between the 2 models of Ahmad Shamlu and Nima Yushir. With the emergence of the Ghaznavids and their successors, such as Ghurids, Timurids, and Mughal Empire, Persian culture and its literature gradually moved into Southeast Asia. In general, from its earliest days, Persian literature and language were imported into the subcontinent by culturally Persianized Turkic and Afghan dynasties. Persian became the language of the nobility, literary circles, and the royal Mughal courts for hundreds of years. In the early 19th century, due to the influence of British in India, unfortunately, Hindustani replaced Persian language in India. The American poet Ralph Waldo Emerson was another admirer of Persian poetry. He published several essays in 1876 that discuss Persian poetry, letters, and social aims from the Persian ghazals of Hafiz. Perhaps the most popular Persian poet of the 19th and 20th centuries in England was Omar Khayyam. His rubaiyat was freely translated by Edward Fitzgerald in 1859. Omar Khayyam is esteemed more as a scientist than a poet in his own Persia, but in Fitzgerald's rendering, he became one of the most quoted poets in English. The Persian poet and mystic Rumi, known as Maulana in Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, and as Melvana in Turkey, attracted a large following in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Popularizing translations by Coleman Barks have presented Rumi as a New Age sage. There are also a number of more literary translations by such scholars as A.J. Arbery. The classical poems of Hafiz, Sa'di, Khayyam, Rumi, Nezami, and Ferdowsi are now widely known in English and can be read in various translations. Other works of Persian literature are mostly not translated and little known. Okay, this concludes my talk on Persian literature and history. Now, with your permission, I would like in the few minutes, whatever time that is left of my 60 minutes allowed time, I would like to speak a few words about my objective, and why I spent the last 3-4 years of my life to produce a book in English language. As I mentioned earlier, the first reason was that I realized that there are thousands and thousands of second and third generation Iranians who, unfortunately, are not capable of reading their own mother's language, and thus they are deprived of getting to know about our great, rich cultural inheritance, which has been left over hundreds of years by the greatest men in the history of mankind. Secondly, Iran's literature and culture and poetry has not been introduced to the world at large. Yes, as I mentioned, there are a number of Persian poets, the great famous ones have been translated and introduced somehow to the world. But in general, the English-speaking people throughout the world have not had the opportunity to learn about Iran, our culture, our richness. So I decided that it is time that somebody do something about this. And then I decided to do something about this as my last effort before I transpire, by creating a program through which I could, with the participation of the people of Iran, of Iranians who value our heritage and care, to put it up in the world for the world to see and comprehend and enjoy and appreciate. This particular book, 12 Centuries of Persian Poetry in English, which is, yes, thank you, Dr. Barzigar, which is really a concise book containing 1,200 years of Persian poetry since its start 1,200 years ago, as I explained in my talk, starting with the Persian Renaissance in the 8th and 9th century, up to the present time. It's inclusive of the old and new, from the start of Persian poetry creation after the Arab invasion up to the present time. And I think I reviewed that process in my talk for you. So this book is a complete book containing the whole history, including about the works and introduction of about 150 poets and the writers and the arifs throughout our history. And it's a complete book, and it's written in a language which is readable and understandable by the majority of people throughout the world who are able to read and write English. The way I chose to do this was to create a program by which, with the help of everybody, I cannot do it by myself, it's too large. It's too large to touch it even. To send 1,000 copies of this book, which is unique and has not ever been written or published by anybody else as far as I know, to gift 1,000 copies of this book to 1,000 universities, top universities of the world, throughout the 5 continents, and gift it to these universities. So these books, once are in the archives of these universities, will stay there forever, because universities like Cambridge, like Oxford, like all great universities throughout the world, they are not here to go today or tomorrow. They will be there forever. Well, Cambridge and Oxford have been there since 11th century, and they are going to be there for another 11 centuries to come, and more and more. So this way, I'm immortalizing for the future generations throughout the world a book that contains a comprehensive, complete history and a story of our culture. That's number one. So the future generations will get to know us through this book, and there is no other medium through which people throughout the world can get to know us. And then, of course, as I said, our new generations have a right to know about their own countries, culture, and creations. So for these 2 purposes, I have created this book, and now I'm asking for help from people to purchase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 volumes, whatever that they can, and dedicate it to whatever university throughout the world that they want. All they need is to call me to order whatever number of books that they would like to donate. I already have a network in place to deliver these books. And let me tell you, I have been myself the first to embark on this. I have used my own financial capability to now, up to now, dedicate 110 volumes of this book that you see to 110 universities in the countries in Europe, in Asia, in Australia. And of course, there is still a long way to go. 110 is not sufficient. I would like to see, and I think we should all like to see, every one of those 1,000 universities throughout the world get a copy of this book. But I cannot do this task by myself. It's just impossible. And so I'm asking for help of people who love Iran, who love Persian culture, to come in and help. Let us immortalize our culture, our beautiful culture. Let us keep it alive for the future generations. Let us give it to our children to find out what we were, where we have come from, and where we're going to. Thank you very much for your attention. I really enjoyed talking to you. Unfortunately, the light in this room was very poor. It's not really, suitable for doing a lecture. But of course, I did the best I could for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nezami. Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you so much. I mean, we applaud you for all you do for the Iranian culture and poetry and literature. And I know that you have done a lot, with your Shab Sher and your television and all the lectures you give throughout the United States and perhaps in the world. And we really, applaud you for that, and kudos to you for what you do, and we wish you all the best. But before we open this to questions,